Watch out, let me get a shot. Where they at? Where they at?
On that rooftop. Hey! Give me a fucking 42 in the United States!
We're east of the riverbed, and we're taking fire from the west. Roger, stand by, we're popping smoke. Gun runs north and south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke.
Okay, copy. West of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now.
Give it to me, I need it. You're cleared hot.
Copy, cleared hot.
Welcome to the Combat Leadership Podcast. Here's our host, Mike Etor.
Hello, leaders. Today's guest is retired Marine Corps Major Fred Galvin. Fred has an extensive combat record, and I'm just thrilled. I've been stalking Fred. We know each other for virtually. We've never met in person, but we've had some long talks via Zoom and all that. And he is certainly a Marine's Marine and somebody I would have been proud to serve with and for in any capacity. So, Fred, with that, thank you for showing up. Welcome. And could you tell the audience a little bit more depth? Obviously, my introduction was very brief and didn't do you justice.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me, Mike. And the high level, I'm a Midwest guy, grew up there in Eastern Kansas, played every sport growing up on our block. And then at a very young age, at 5, I have an older brother, and he got me into martial arts. He's 10 years older than me. And so judo led to Okinawan karate, and I did that very passionately every day, hours every day. And up until the time in high school when I got involved in team sports and had to make the choice, because we went to an all-boy Jesuit high school. It's very regimented, focus on academics and athletics. So I started football and track and had to give up karate, but I loved the passion and the discipline of both individual and team competition. And that was taught to me by some great mentors, great teachers, and those Jesuits. After going back upon retiring from the Marine Corps, it was truly a privilege, Mike, to be mentored by Jesuits and instructors at that school. They'd show up in the morning. I didn't realize this until looking back 30 years, but they would get in there and they'd teach class. They would teach sports after school, leaving at like 5:30 or 6. They'd do their lesson plan, and they had families. But that shows how dedicated those men were. And seeing after spending I joined the Marine Corps right after high school, a week after graduating at 17, and went right into boot camp out in San Diego. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit later because I just went back there, as you and I know, and interesting observations, which we'll get to later. But served in the Marine Corps as an enlisted Marine, went to Desert Storm, came back, went to college at Cal State San Marcos there, also in Southern California, just south of Camp Pendleton, and earned a bachelor's in history and a bachelor's in social science. I loved American and military history. I was exposed to that from my mom, who started at a travel agency, worked herself up into operations, being the vice president of operations and planning these many of which Oracle America, but battlefield tours of our revolutionary and civil wars, and saw the sacrifices that Americans made. And at 10 years old, Mike, I was in such awe. I became a shoe-in, or the recruiter's best dream, that they didn't have to do anything. I jumped on the hook and jumped in the boat for them. But so I joined right after high school, went to Desert Storm, saw limited combat as it was there, but it still was combat. And then, as I said, I tried out for reconnaissance at 1st Recon Battalion. I took their NDOC. Our company executive officer, I think nowadays we don't have to be so politically correct. We can call people fat or well-nourished, but he was a well-nourished warrior, and he had a deep resentment for me, even just because my platoon sergeant allowed me to take the NDOC for 1st Recon Battalion, but he really looked down upon that, thought I was disloyal, thought I was trying to get out of a deployment, which I wasn't, and it closed the door very hard on me, both before and after deployment. So that led me to getting out, going to college. But I will say one thing, Mike, and I know this is just a big overview of my life. If you keep something, if there's a goal that somebody with some tenacity has, and you restrict and you put an obstacle in the way, that individual is, going to accomplish that. So as a military leader, you have to recognize that later in life, that maybe you do make some concessions and look at the big picture like, I can lose one guy that wants to go there because he's probably going to be a career Marine. But anyway, so I didn't get the chance to, as an enlisted Marine. I finished college, recruited right out of the university to be a stockbroker, worked for 2 years. And I left Smith Barney, which at that time was the largest firm on Wall Street as far as assets under management and number of analysts. I enjoyed that work. Very interesting. And until about 2 months ago, I was trading since January of 1994 all the way until just 2 months ago. And I loved researching stocks, trading options, but that's another story that's not fit for this podcast. And then I went, I had what many call in the Marine Corps a starter marriage. Married as a young sergeant, and the girl from the beach was she was interested in a lot of things besides me, and that led me to getting a divorce. And I saw one of these officer selection officers in the barber shop, and I was getting my hair cut, and I was still in the Marine Reserves, and he said, "Hey, Fred, I know you were the first Marine that, when I was an officer selection officer, and you walked in and, we did all the paperwork, and then you turned the Marine Corps down." And I said, "Well, sir, I've learned some things since then. And one of them is you were overly honest that it wasn't totally the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. You said that needs in the Marine Corps, if there's 250 lieutenants at the basic school and they need 250 data processors, you're going to be a commo." And I said, there's no way that I just want to do like fully open contract, no choice. But he didn't tell me about the competition and the quality spread, and that you do have some influence but not control. So I learned later from some people that had gotten commission, and you know what, Mike, after 2 years as a broker, which I loved, put in a package. He said, "This is actually my last day as an officer selection officer." He's like, "I'm going to career level or the captain's course." And he said, so we sat there in his office, did the paperwork, got a commission, became an infantry officer, worked my first platoon commander tour with at first light armored reconnaissance, where one of my mentors will talk in a while about Lieutenant Colonel Powers. He was instrumental in breeding that warrior mindset and ethos into especially his lieutenants, and we'll talk about that later. But really blessed to have that, as well as my company commander. He had done a tour as a infantry officer at 1st Anglico. Those are a group that deploy with joint and coalition forces that control aviation, naval gunfire, and indirect fire. And he bred that into us as lieutenants, which you don't always get as a young lieutenant, the complete integration. But that was very unique, and I'm grateful for having that experience. But then my passion, because I had that obstacle, Mike, put in my way as an enlisted Marine, that I couldn't go to recon, going to officer candidate school was not simply to become an officer. It was to become a force recon platoon commander. And that was the goal. Nothing was standing in the way. I did anything and everything mentally, physically. I mean, I when everybody else had these lieutenant pads in Southern California that they had 4 or 5 guys and focus was liberty and having a good time. I lived in the barracks, and after training day, if we were in garrison, it was complete focus 100% on mental and physical training to get beyond the toughest state you could to just master the training that would be required. And I will say, and I know I'll talk about this in a little bit later, that I was inspired a couple different times early as a young sergeant and then as a lieutenant, seeing, especially on ship. I saw the Force Recon Marines come off this ship from doing a direct action mission, and their mindset. I mean, these were beasts, and their mindset was just totally on that mission. They didn't want to have any distractions, and you could tell coming off the helicopters with their balaclava, which is a full encompassing face for fire retardancy, but every piece of gear was for a purpose, and it was tailored and 100% complete commitment and focused on the mission. Now, that may not be with every platoon, but that's what I observed as a lieutenant, and that's what I wanted to do, and that's what led me to, as a lieutenant, going over to become a Force Recon platoon commander in Okinawa, and that pretty much was my bag. As a Marine officer, I did 10 and a half years in command, mostly in Force Recon, Marine Special Operations. I was blessed with my last assignment was also in command at the Fleet Anti-Terrorism Security Teams, which were created after the American embassy invasion in Tehran. And but that was good closure for me because likewise, we had terrorists take over an American facility in Benghazi, and we deployed a platoon not to Benghazi. That happened the day before, but September 12th, 2012, launched into Tripoli and held the American Embassy and security for the Regional Affairs Office for 90 days. But retired in 2014, moved back to Midwest due to a family situation where one of our siblings had terminal cancer. Started a business the day I retired, built that for 5 years. This was in the inner cities, very high risk business, putting automatic teller machines all across basic war zones in mid-America. Was blessed enough to be able to sell a very high risk but very profitable business. And that led me to, it was an answered prayer, truly was. Because I was praying that I not be the second child that my mom had to bury. And so I was praying for a regular job, and I was applied and offered a position here in Hawaii, and moved here and worked at the Marine Forces Pacific, Special Operations Command Pacific, and the Joint Interagency Task Force for 4 years. In charge of a lot of programs in Southeast and Northeast Asia. That really opened my eyes to a lot of things that I had not previously known, which was good. And then I worked as the training manager for Tesla of North America, basically like the training and education command for Tesla North America for 2 years, and started retirement about 2 months ago, Mike. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Well, thank you for that. Well, what a interesting and robust background. So thank you for that. Well, listen, Fred, let's get on to it. There's some standard questions I ask right at the front. So this podcast is obviously all about combat leadership and related topics. So what's your elevator pitch? What are your few sentences, a couple of lines, philosophy on combat leadership?
Okay, I would say in a few lines, there's more and more tasks levied on leaders, unfortunately, and hopefully this Secretary of Defense cuts a lot of that out. These are the cover your ass tasks, and they're getting plagued. Commanders are being plagued, and their troops as well, to get on the computer. And Mike, there's so many these days. When I retired, almost 12 years ago, they had done studies with RAND that showed that a commander has to make choices because there's so many tasks they have. If they enumerated the task and put time requirements for each, you have twice as many tasks as you can do. So my point is, you have to prioritize as a commander, and you always have to prioritize. That's a good, and I'd rather be deficient in some of these administrative online BS tasks of, things that have no relation to combat. They all have some indirect, but to prioritize the field training and to make that as challenging, as realistic, and as demanding, not just on leaders, but on every Marine. And that right there is very, very difficult and taxing for unit level leaders in operations and in command to build training that challenges everybody to make that more difficult, more integrated than actual combat is. But that is the goal. And I would say, not that I didn't have a perfect career. There's always things that you can look back and do much better. But I think the focus of, as we're trained at the basic school, is you have to turn the map around and focus on the enemy, understanding that enemy is determined, they're breathing, they have a mind, and they want to kill, and they want to do it grotesquely. So you have to keep that in mind, and that has to be something that a leader is, and I've been criticized by superiors, people I don't honestly have a lot of respect for, but that, Fred, you're so hyper-focused on getting on the objective and doing actions on the objective that's all you do. He's like, it's like when I talk to the guys at Fort Bragg at Delta Force, you're just like them. You're just so one-sided. You're monolithic. And you know what, Mike? I'd rather be that. And just like I mentioned in a book I wrote, The Last Sentence, I brought every Marine home alive.
Yeah.
Now that I believe is more divine providence. But you have to say, God gave us talents and you've got to use those. And God help you if you live with those regrets, because I've seen a lot of people that did, and it's because they didn't train their Marines as the first priority.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And for what it's worth, Fred, I think I might have told you this before. When I first heard of you and was interested in talking to you, people said, Mike, some people don't like Fred. And the reason why they don't like Fred, other Marines, peers, maybe seniors, is exactly why you're going to like him. I'm like, oh, okay, why? He's maniacally focused on preparation and execution in combat. And he really could care less about just about anything else. I'm like, a man after my heart. And I got to tell you, if that is your reputation, Fred, whoever thinks that is a bad thing, suffice it to say, they won't be invited on this podcast, because I don't want to breed that mentality anywhere else. So good on you, and you don't need me to tell you how valuable that mindset is. So I want to talk about this and ask you, Fred, most combat leaders, I know myself, prior to being fortunate enough, and I say fortunate enough because I think most real warriors want that chance to prove themselves in that ultimate test. Most of us have mentors in hindsight that maybe sometimes we realize while it's happening, and other times in hindsight, like, that guy really influenced me a lot. Did you fall under the kind tutelage of one or more mentors that definitely made you a better combat leader?
100%. And they're numerous. It started, as I mentioned, with that martial arts mentality as a young guy, but I will say that grew into the team sports in high school. It grew from the tutelage of drill instructors who are very focused on rigid, precise standards. But my first real exposure for somebody that was, as they say in these change of command ceremonies, and I remember at his change of command ceremony, they they pass the guidon or the colors, the unit flag from one outgoing commander to the incoming commander. And that saying that is traditionally said, I will never forget, and it's always impressed me. And this individual that had his change of command, I'm talking about then Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Powers, they give the guidon of the battalion, and they said, this tradition signifies the complete commitment of the unit commander to the mission. And I believe he embodied that. To this day, he still reaches out, not just to catch up, but to mentor and inspire, not just myself, countless. And I'll tell you how he did it, Mike. On his change of command just prior, I remember they asked, is there anything that you want in the battalion area? You know, in a lot of commanders, they want this resolute desk and maybe some memorabilia of the battalion. And this is an individual that literally, not that it's the epitome of warrior, but he had 21-inch arms. He had a face more like a minotaur, like half man and half beast. And constantly it's almost like he had an attachment from his right hand to a cigar. And he said, yeah, I want a bear pit, a big bear pit, enough for 10 Marines to be fighting 10 other Marines in this pit. And he was not joking. He had done this in previous commands. He'd done it throughout his career, that he was a fist fighter. And not just like some of these commanders, like I've heard, you know, when General Mattis pinned on his 3rd star and was down in San Diego, he said, I'm a brawler. This Lieutenant Colonel Powers didn't talk about that. He got out in the bear pit. He is somebody that I have personally witnessed brawling multiple men and teaching that and having that become, and I will tell you what, Mike, prior to that, there was we had and I think you know him, he was our battalion commander. He was a totally different animal, Lieutenant Colonel Sword. And the Marine Corps at Infantry Officer course had combatives. They taught fighting and they encouraged that. But then you get into operational forces, and there was like an unsaid rule that don't get your Marines beat up, you know, teeth knocked out, concussed. So sort of like in the movie Braveheart, that you had to play outlawed tunes on outlawed bags. So I went and got gloves and headgear and mouthpiece and made the calculated risk. We got behind defilade near the battalion, and every single one of our Marines we boxed. And I say that because the outgoing commander, there was an unsaid discouragement. He probably would not have supported that type of physical training, where I wanted to test to see what Marine, you know, would fight brutally and what Marines needed to be encouraged more. But with Colonel Powers, it was literally the gloves were off. There was no gloves in the bear pit. It was mano-a-mano, brutal. It was multiple Marines on one. It was just like the enemy will be, unfair, dirty tactics. But there was other things that he instilled in us, you know, not that we got everywhere by vehicles, but he did physically tough hikes, and he demanded that we spend half of the month in the field. And that pissed a lot of people off, because a lot of people got comfortable, especially the officers. The more senior they got, the more funds and affluence and the better house and wife and kids, they disliked that. But to me, that was like, okay, because I was heavily criticized by, I remember a company commander when I was a lieutenant. Oh, his Marines don't know when they're coming and going from the field because they're always in the field. But Colonel Powers, he didn't do that because of me. He did that because that was, you had to have a mastery of your tactics. And he built that in, and it was just a breath of fresh air. But he was extraordinarily focused on crew-served weapons mastery, understanding the weapons that truly will give you the advantage against your enemy. And And I'm talking all crew served weapons, medium, light, the 25 millimeter chain gun of the LAV 25. But we got ammo. He increased our ammo allocation and field time. And to me, as a young second lieutenant and lieutenant, I just thought, this is nirvana. I'm in Southern California. We're coming in on these, amphibious landing craft air cushions and salting into the beach. And I have a battalion commander that now is even more aggressive than I was. Things that we used to do in private now are done openly, without any fear of repercussion. He encouraged this. And so having that mentor, and I will say this, because a subsequent tour, my only B billet, Mike, was as an instructor out at the Marines Aviation Center of Excellence in Yuma, Arizona. They call it the Marine Aviation Weapons and Tactics Squadron 1. So it's also out in the middle of the desert in Yuma. It's a man ranch, not a glamorous place for a single man. So on the weekends, being a single man, I'd like to go into San Diego where there was more of the female of the species, and I'd often stay at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot where they had low-priced accommodations within striking distance of population centers. So, but I ran across Colonel Powers after he had given up the battalion on 2 occasions when I was recovering from the weekend and getting my hair cut on a long 4-day weekend. And I saw him in his Charlies. And I want to say this, that he inspired me as a young leader, that the troop welfare isn't just giving your guys time off. It's, he had some Marines that were accused of something or whatever down on the drill field. And he got in his service uniform and went down there to speak on their behalf. And I didn't get into the details of that, but I saw it on 2 occasions, repeatedly, and throughout the years, he, helped myself and countless others. And the reason I'm saying that is because unfortunately, it's an anomaly. Some leaders won't go that extra mile because it may tarnish their ability to get promoted. If you side for somebody that did something in a gray area, that the Marine Corps has a mindset that sometimes discipline is, there is regrettably a rush to judgment. And if they make a decision, that's the command decision. But Colonel Powers, he stood by, he was very loyal, and he fought, especially if there's no evidence to really pin somebody on. He wanted to let those in charge know what type of a Marine that was that he had served with. So he was a all-around mentor and a warrior's warrior, not somebody that you would see wearing a service or a dress uniform often. He was always there as a lieutenant. You'd see the battalion commander in the field constantly, because that's where he wanted to see his Marines in action and inspire them, test them. And like I said, it wasn't always appreciated by some of the senior leaders, both senior enlisted and officers, but the young Marines, they loved it. They really loved his leadership.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And I'm sitting here, chuckling to myself, because I know Jeff Powers.
Yes.
And I am a Jeff Powers fan. And I think Jeff Powers, at every level of his career, was what I say, the epitome of a Marine Corps leader. Just watching that guy, looking at him, listening to him, his priorities. Not only does it not get any better than Jeff Powers, but the Marine Corps would be a whole lot better during his era and now if more leaders had that attitude and that approach to things. And I think there's some out there today, they're facing an uphill battle because it's even less popular today. And I'm being very careful with my words here, so I'm pointing this out to the young fellows that are listening to this. You mentioned the previous commander, and I know him as well. And you've had the experience as a young officer of having what I would view as an average officer. And I'm being charitable here. And unfortunately, there's a whole lot of guys out there like him. And so he preceded Powers, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you went from, I'm being charitable, an average leader who was very much in the mode of the modern Marine Corps at the time, don't take risks, a little bit too much focus on the cerebral versus the physical and getting down to it. And all of a sudden, this fire breather comes in. And this is the guy that you and I envisioned as a Marine before we ever stepped foot on a recruit depot. You know what I mean? This was what we expected, and he did not disappoint. Jeff Powers did not disappoint. And if I have my way, Jeff Powers will be a guest on this podcast, you know? So I'm just telling the younger fellows, what I'm really trying to say is, you have to be on your game for leadership. You have to cast a wide net of learning and observing, because not everybody is blessed with a Jeff Powers. Some guys go through their entire career with nothing but average or worse leaders. Others, like me, went through their whole career and I got one Jeff Powers after another. Just blessed, you know? And I was a little older. I was enlisted as well, Fred, as you know, and I was old enough and wise enough to know how lucky I was. You know, I had a great time. You know, the next battalion, my buddies are suffering under a guy that not only does not master his game, he's tactically inept. And as you know, that often in the Marine Corps, peacetime Marine Corps has nothing to do with an officer's upward mobility. You know, sadly, you know, and that's how we get guys that are, you know, Assad Khan. I listened to one of his podcast episodes the other day, and he used to teach at MSTP. And they would hold a special class for the newly selected brigadier generals. And he was astounded how, you know, these 9 or 10 or 12 brigadiers that they just promoted, how many of them literally did not know what commander's intent was, an intent statement. They didn't know the bare basic concepts of warfighting, yet the Marine Corps just made them a general officer. And of course, you know, the guys that are brigadier generals, I would say more than half of them become major generals, and some of them become lieutenants, generals, and some of them become the commandant, you know? So be warned, leaders out there in the Army or other services, don't ever be lulled into a false sense of security or admiration just because a guy's wearing a certain rank on his collar, or certain awards for that matter. Judge the merit, the substance of the individual. So enough of my pontificating. Aside from mentors, did you have any kind of a role model, you know, long dead or somebody you served with, somebody you studied? As you know, if I ever serve in combat as a leader, I want to be like that guy right there. Did you have one or more of those?
You know, Mike, I'm going to answer that by drawing upon what you just said. So there were times in my career where, you know, you had the epitome of Colonel Powers, and my company commander at that time, he was Captain Kelly Alexander, had that background in Anglico, really focused on tactics. But then going over to force reconnaissance, it was, I will say, more of what you had discussed previous. You know, there was an absence of void. Now, there were some good leaders. There weren't many who were ill-intentioned, but there were a few. And won't get into that. But I will say I had enough knowledge from being enlisted and seeing that there was this technology in Desert Storm, very limited quantities. And by technology, I'm talking about global positioning satellite, GPS systems for navigation, night vision goggles, and we had enough to be dangerous. And I knew that as a young guy, that if I was ever put in command, I was going to train the Marines so that we do not have friendly fire casualties or deaths. And so when I checked into 5th Force Reconnaissance in Okinawa, Japan as a first lieutenant, I was, just back from our first deployment, wanted to go to Force Recon. There was that void. And so I will say that, a lot of, and this may be very taboo to say, but a lot of people would say, your mentors have to be senior. And I saw that absence, but I did not see the absence. When you're a young first lieutenant in Force Recon, I will tell you, I don't care. You don't know what you don't know. And right after reconnaissance training here, the day after, we're flying on a plane up to Pohang, South Korea to do 30 days, to do 3 10-day cold weather mountainous patrols with the Republic of Korea Special Recon Marines. And you have to rely, and as just a young lieutenant that was trained on observation then, and now I'm having to apply this, seeing what those staff NCOs do and their commitment, how they, develop a plan to put everything in containers, because we do operate in Force Recon for brief periods of time very independently. And that means either bringing your own chow and water or finding in, because it's not organic to our unit. A Force Recon unit doesn't deploy with you. And so you have to be very self-reliant. And I saw the dedication of first my platoon sergeant, and he was what you would epitomize of the phrase gung-ho. And I just remember the very first meeting that we had after I finished reconnaissance training, and I'm sitting in this our unit leadership meeting, and it was led by the operations officer. He said, Marine Forces Pacific has 87 of these exercises this year, and which there's 3 Force Recon platoons, so you couldn't do all these exercises. And I asked my peer that I just turned over the platoon with, I said, Chaco, how do you sign up for these? Well, you just talk to the operations officer, and but you can't go on all of them because you need some downtime. And I took that as a challenge, Mike. I turned to my platoon sergeant the very next, I said, Gunny, I wanted to go on as many of these exercises as we possibly can, because knowing that Okinawa, there was limitations on ranges, all the infantry battalions that are there for 6 months, they're trying to use those limited ranges. And so going to these exercises gave you ammo, gave you a lot of integration with aviation, and gave you unlimited ranges in many cases. So that is I said, I want to go on as many of these. And the response from that platoon sergeant was, hell yes, sir. And we were off to the races. So I will say that mentoring, and this is sadly, because there was a void in officer, it was kind of aloof, that if somebody's not completely committed, they're going to spend a lot of time doing damage control with their higher headquarters, and probably not a lot of time mentoring their subordinates like they're supposed to. So I was observing these staff NCOs that, I will be honest, Mike, they showed, they walked the walk. They sacrificed their marriages in many cases, which isn't always good. I don't advocate for that, but
Of course.
they did not want their Marines to die, because the mission of Force Recon is you're supporting a Marine Expeditionary Force, a 3-star commander. He has to have information. In those days, we didn't have all this technology. So doctrinally, you're going from 30 to 300 kilometers deep behind the enemy lines, and our threat there was North Korea. So we were planning on operating in cold, mountainous terrain with an enemy force that was disciplined, that was resourced. We hadn't tested them, so there was a lot of unknown, but just to get into the missions was very high risk. and watching that staff NCO leadership and seeing how they mentored and the time that they took mentoring their team leaders and the recon Marines. Awesome, Mike. I mean, I gained so much knowledge, and I'll admit that I became hooked like some addict would on a booze or pills. I became hooked to that mission and seeing the dedication of those Marines. I honestly, I'm not trying to smear anyone else or diminish, but I just thought this is perfect. I mean, I'm learning from people who did embody complete commitment, and we're going to Australia, to Guam, to Korea, to Philippines, to Thailand on a monthly basis. We did 16 of these off-island exercises before deploying on 2 back-to-back amphibious ship deployments, which, having the same platoon pretty much the whole time was a direct attribute of the dedication of that platoon sergeant. So I was really blessed with having unique and extraordinary leadership, but it was from the enlisted ranks.
Well, thank you, Fred. And my experience was the same. And again, I'm speaking to the younger folks out there, some of whom aren't even in the military yet. You show me an average or substandard, and let's face it, we have bad officers. You show me a substandard officer, and chances are that he did not have your experience or mine with strong NCOs and staff NCOs who saw a brand new second lieutenant as a good man that's already proven himself. He belongs here, but he's here to be shaped. And we have a chance to make this person into the kind of leader we deserve, because he doesn't know what he doesn't know right now. And I find that the very best NCOs, I include NCOs, corporals and sergeants in this, as well as staff NCOs, they take an officer's development really as one of their primary duties, right on par with taking care of their Marines or their soldiers in the Army sense and all of that. So I agree entirely. So for you NCOs and staff NCOs out there, are you living up to that? You know, does your leadership and tactical DNA live on through every officer? Because, you know, the bad ones that are out there, we've met officers who did not trust NCOs and staff NCOs. They didn't like them. They had no regard for them. And that didn't happen overnight. You know, we all leave TBS told, almost brainwashed, trust your NCOs, trust your staff NCOs. And then, unfortunately, for a small minority, they get out there and they have an untrustworthy staff NCO or a staff NCO or more NCOs that are, they're not good Marines. So
working against the commander's intent.
Yeah,
sometimes.
Exactly. So I love what you're saying. A lot of lessons in there, what you're saying. Well, let's talk about combat leadership. This is always an ongoing debate. Do you think, let's face it, Fred, you got a robust combat history, much more than mine, but I think it's safe to say, I know I feel this way, the vast majority of my 24-year career was in peacetime, preparing for combat. And so was yours, I would assume. You know, a lot of times guys come in and they say, I'm going to come in and spend 20 years and, 18 and a half are going to be in the shit, so to speak. And
doesn't usually happen like that.
That really doesn't happen. And we've got senior officers and staff NCOs today that did 2 or 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, heavy combat experience, bar none. But still, at this point in their career, they might have, let's just say they have 3 years deployed. And I'm not minimizing that. It's Fallujah, Helmand Province, I mean, some serious stuff. But now, now they've got 17 years in peacetime.
Yes.
So where I'm going with this is there a difference between peacetime leadership and general military garrison leadership and combat leadership? And if so, what is it?
Very good question. And I'll go back as an example to what we had talked about when I was a lieutenant. I had this dichotomy of battalion commanders, one who had very meticulous maintenance management records. The supply inventory was like a well-oiled small business. The supply chain was, everything was accounted for, and vehicles were maintained, but they weren't necessarily used for their purpose of going out there to be in the field for gunnery and to fight and to win. So I want to expand on that of what I saw on multiple combat deployments to Iraq, multiple combat deployments to Afghanistan, taking down ships at sea. Unfortunately, I have one thing in common, as I saw more senior officers, captains through lieutenant colonels, who were more hesitant. They were more reluctant to engage the enemy. The enemy was there. They knew it. But as an example, I had an aviation combat element commander, and this was my third deployment on ships as a force recon platoon commander, which is unusual, but we had always done top-down visit board search and seizures. These are seizing ships at sea, coming in a assault support aircraft. In that time, it was a CH-46. But during our workups in 2002, because there had been a crash that killed 6 Marines and 1 corpsman in December 1999 doing the same training, but the lieutenant colonel who was in charge of the aviation combat element said, "I'm not doing a top-down profile." So, but he was rewarded and he got promoted, but that rendered a lot of our capabilities. And had I not been a force recon platoon commander and been trained over in Okinawa, that there's alternate techniques. You can do bottom up using a telescopic painter's pole and grappling hook, sort of like Batman, and assaulting the ship bottom up, which is what we did. And we deployed with the very first expeditionary strike group that had cruisers, frigates, destroyers with these rigid hold inflatable boats that we did that. But when we took down 39 ships doing bottom up, a lot of people questioned, why did you do that? I said, well, and I had to tell them, because I'm going to be frank, that our aviation unit commander allowed heliborne snipers, he allowed Cobras to provide demonstration of force, but he didn't have the guts. And this goes back to the Desert One, where they laid a heavy blame on the Marine aviators for not having the guts to stick out and fly the assault support missions, and then crashing there in Desert One. And I don't want to turn this into a history lesson, but
yeah,
Mike, I saw the same hesitation on the deployment into Iraq after that, so we went from seizing these ships, 39 of them, into Iraq, and the MU commanding officer, the colonel, pulled a infantry company, and I knew that infantry company commander. He pulled them off the line, got them out of combat, because the Mujahideen controlled neighborhood there, and the Gurumsha tribe said, hey, they were shooting at civilians, which is a total lie. And so you have commanders so easily deceived by the enemy because they didn't, and this guy was an infantry officer, the MU commanding officer, always talked about field craft, but he was this very physically fit, garrison-minded, and I saw that. And Mike, my experiences are a little bit unique because as a force recon platoon commander in Okinawa, I was there for 3 years. I saw infantry battalions deploy from Camp Lejeune, 29 Palms, Hawaii, and Camp Pendleton on a 6-month rotational basis, and they would have 4 every 6 months, so that's 8 a year. I saw 24 infantry battalions from across the Marine Corps, and didn't just observe them. I supported them in these exercises, these 16 exercises across the Pacific, supported them on the Marine Expeditionary Units. So I probably saw more infantry battalions as a force recon platoon commander in those 3 years, and then doing multiple combat deployments in Iraq where force recon is a support occupational specialty. We're not the main effort. Sometimes we are during raids, but I saw infantry battalions in garrison on peacetime deployments that were weak, that had the focus on keeping mortars and machine guns clean versus going to the field and using them. Now, I did see, and I'll call out one particular battalion, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines. They had excellent leaders, sharp officers, aggressive throughout the entire battalion. That was due to strong leadership. But I saw, and I will call out a few in Iraq, I saw reserve and active duty infantry battalions telling us, their intel officers, when we were coming in and taking over, they said, don't go to Haditha. They will kill you. You're a 25-man force recon platoon. You'll be destroyed. And I was like, we're going in there, and we're going to go in there every night that we possibly can, that we have a target. I saw another, and that was a reserve battalion. I saw East Coast Infantry Battalion hunkered down in Western Iraq saying, hey, we got hit with 2 suicide vehicle car bombs that blew up and detonated, killed some of our guys. They hunkered down on their base. And having that hesitancy where a 25-man platoon has to come in and basically prime the pump and jumpstart the engine. Mike, that happens because when you are in peacetime and you are not training for, when the accounts look good, when you've done all your Marine Corps Institute or correspondence courses and all this grab-ass training that looks good on paper, and those guys they're a shoe-in for promotion because on paper everything looks good, but they're not in the field. And Mike, you'll never see those leaders in the field when it's nasty hot, when it's forecast for heavy rains and sleet and snow. You may see them on a sunny day, go to the range and come back, but that complacency builds hesitancy, builds fear. When you spend more time with the families, you have this expectation that you must continue to provide more time. And that creates in someone's mind that I don't want to lose that. And I've heard leaders say this in combat, that if how much they miss their family, that's natural for a father and a husband to feel that way. But when you embark on those ships and that ramp goes up in the aircraft and you're heading into combat, your mind has to be violent and aggressive. And leaders all the way to the top, the 3 and 4 star levels, the designers of Field Manual 3 TAC 25 counterinsurgency, Lieutenant General Petraeus, Lieutenant General Mattis, use slogans as "first do no harm." That breeds weakness. It breeds cowardice. It breeds dead Marines. When a Marine has a mindset, especially if they get ambushed like we had, of first do no harm, that leads to dead Marines. And literally there should be punishment for, we should be punishing our enemies. And I'll get to that in a second, because I really we punished our enemies. When these battalions had hesitancy, we took a 25-man force recon platoon that I led, and we said, I remember talking to the captain, I said, where is the worst area out here in the Husayba area of Western Iraq along the Syrian border? What's the nastiest, worst area? They said the 440 district. And I said, we're going to come up with a plan. I said, you're a reinforced infantry battalion. You got tanks, you got heavy guns, and you got Amtracs. And now we're going to layer in electronic warfare, because I'd been an instructor out there at the Marine Aviation Center Lexington. So we're going to do some things that I can't get into, but we're going to use them. And then once we start gaining the offense, we're going to shake up with some deception, because we're going to come in with tanks on one side, heavy guns on another. We're going to roll the Amtracs up on side. So the only way they can go is to the south. And as soon as we get online, We had a reserve recon platoon, and we just swept hundreds of buildings that night, Mike, and just with, heavy breaching charges. And then as soon as we started getting into it, we dropped a 500-pounder, which was really risky. And our Force Recon Company commander took some heat for that later, which I was glad he put that skin in the game. But the tempo, the shock and confusion that creates the enemy, that is what kickstarted that infantry battalion to be able to, like, shit, if one 25-man Force Recon platoon can do all this, what can a reinforced infantry battalion do? But
Yeah.
you have to have that confidence. And that comes through experience. It comes through training, comes through realistic and challenging training. And if you don't have that, to answer your question, Mike, yeah, there's two different types. There's a good general military leader that can keep everything, polished and pretty. And I forget who the leader was. You probably remember, Mike. It said, if I could have two armies, one for parades and pageantry, and I'm paraphrasing here, and one for combat, I would. And, you need to be in the latter. You need to be the one that's known for violence and tenacity and constantly having that mind of, in training and in combat, of how you can outpace and outmaneuver your enemy to just destroy. And the one thing I love to do, and I didn't get into this in the book because that's not what the book was written for, but you must, this is not an option, this is an axiom, you must punish our enemies to create such a fear in them that they have hesitancy, reluctance. They never want to approach. And that was created in the Marines, whether it was in Chosin Reservoir, whether it was in Somalia with Don't Mess with the Black Boots, the Marines versus the Army, the Marines wore black boots, whether it was in the Helmand province where Recon wore on their helmets the black night vision goggle mounting device, they said, don't mess with the black diamonds, because they knew that if you do that, they will bring in air. These are a few guys, but they were going to punish you, and you have to make your enemy aware that in a different way in Iraq, we, on this one deployment, we ran up the score so much that it outnumbered all of the other Force Recon deployments, even in Vietnam, where they did 13 months, where we were doing 7, and they had a full company of 6 platoons, and it's not a competition, but we were doing so many raids. And Mike, when you can go in silently without the enemy knowing, just like Sun Tzu says, it's best when you don't have to apply the force, you don't have to draw the sword, but when you could go in and capture without them even knowing. And we would be doing interrogations in detention facilities, and they said, people think it's aliens that are abducting our leaders, but when you can create that kind of deception and psychological operations and fear, that it's creating that hesitancy, I would submit, however you do it, whether it's with the heavy hand of violence or with deception, that you put your enemy off balance so much that is your competitive advantage. That's what you as leaders have to achieve. And it doesn't come with, Jane Wayne days and morale events and getting all the wives out there and, on the range and having them feel happy. That stuff I never, ever did. And when it was suggested, I was an operations officer 3 times, and I had this one leader, oh, let's do this for the family. Like, hey, the best insurance policy is demanding, rugged, rigorous, physical, and tactical training that will give them the greatest chance for survivability.
I agree with that. Everything you're saying, I agree with. And there's another quote. I don't know who it is. I think it might be Rommel or Patton. And it says, I'm paraphrasing now, but the gist of it is, Fred, the best way to look out for the welfare of your troops is to provide first-rate training.
Yes.
And so I agree with what you're saying. And, I hate for you and I and other guests to be the ones that burst the bubble of the younger folks who have a very idealistic view. For the young fellows out there are leaders out there that they want to be battalion commanders in the sense that they want to get in the job and escape it without any accidents or equipment being damaged or whatever. And then you've got the rare few who are there hoping, they don't want to lose Marines, but they hope that they get an opportunity to go out there and terrorize the enemy. And I would say, if I was to give the Marines and the Army and any combatants, because I think special ops guys have this mentality, we're fighting Taliban, terrorists. We need to establish a climate where we terrorize them.
Yes.
That they're always looking over, like, what are they up to? We haven't seen them for a few days. What next? And I often think, and I want to get your opinion on this. I'm going to add this to the interview outline from now on. I think that we have, rightfully so, such a focus on the law of land warfare. We don't shoot prisoners. We don't, we behave, somebody surrenders, we don't shoot them. They're a prisoner now. We have to provide for them, safety, patch them up or whatever the case may be. But I think there's such a focus on that it has resulted in timid combat leaders who aren't as aggressive as they should be. And with your experience and that of others, Fred, if you're going to get into it, you have got to be, your Marines have to be prepared to be lawfully and appropriately controlled, violent, extreme violence, to where, well, these guys might surrender, and hopefully they'll have a chance to. But right now, we're going in there, and we're going into this to kill every single one of them. And we're going to do it so quickly and violently. If some of them can drop their weapon and raise their hands, we're going to let them surrender. Other than that, we're not doing this to get them to surrender or run away. We're doing this to annihilate them. And I have talked to and interviewed enough combat leaders from Iraq and Afghanistan to know that those, what I call the meat eater units, the enemy lived in fear of them. And unfortunately, all they had to do was to go a click or two to the east or west and come up against a more timid unit.
Yes.
And those were the guys they would attack. Once the real Spartans identified themselves, they were avoided, and those Spartans had to now go look for them even more. So any thoughts on this?
Mike, is so many. And you're right. The one thing, our enemies, they're very radicalized. They're extremists. They're dedicated. But a lot of them are weak. A lot of them, they have to get doped up on drugs, as we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan. And, they come from a brutalized culture where when somebody's literally going to behead you, that's a big deterrent to get on board with the program in these Taliban and Mujahideen controlled areas. So, but they need to know that when we take off the gloves, and God damn the commanders that pushed that battlefield hesitancy, the kill them with kindness, the having tea, literally, and I'm not making light of this. Starting in 2006 with this ushering in of the field manual 3 TAC 24, you couldn't go and prosecute targets based on the intelligence. You had to go suss out and get this federal case with all this is ridiculous. And that's what happened to us in one notable case that I won't get into is we knew there was 4 suicide bombers. We knew the house that they were in, but we had to do this tribal leader engagement. And that nearly got a lot of people killed. But the abandonment of the total war concept, and I'm not saying we go in and firebomb Hiroshima or firebomb Tokyo and then drop atomic bombs. We're not doing that, but you have to go after the enemy with such hesitancy and and use your mind to let them know that you know where they are and you are going to kill them so violently. But instead, make no mistake, Mike, I hope, and usually I will say this, I'm going to diverge to converge. You and I linked up because similar mindsets, but the people that dislike us, they will never be on our LinkedIn. They'll never be friends. They're never going to send you a text or Christmas card. Yeah. They hate us, but those are the same. But bear in mind, and I am not making or embellishing anything up, those are the same leaders that buckled, that bended their knee when it came time to DEI, that believed in all this personal pronouns and this women in combat arms, that softened, that lowered standards, that gave the enemy the benefit of the doubt, that gave the enemy the break. And I will tell you this, I have personal knowledge, multiple firsthand knowledge that the enemy does respect diversity, equity, inclusion. The one pronoun that they understand is he. And by that, I'm talking about high explosives. And when you can put high explosives in accurate rounds, and the enemy, they respect that. But the leaders that focus on this, we got to do this block training and check this, that became, and then contractors came in and did all the thinking for it. They did scenario development. They set up all the ranges. The leaders, they had it on easy street, Mike. And that was when the second time I became an OPSO, I would task these company commanders who had an operations chief to go up to Mount Fuji, to get on a high-speed vessel, something literally day one TBS training plan, basic, walking the golf course kind of, well, who's going to do this? I mean, people became so handicapped and they were looking to take the easy way. You had senior officers, the executive officer, when I was an operations officer, he was a conventional guy, not wrong, but he had no background in reconnaissance and no place to be in reconnaissance, but he'd listen to the, well, why should I, as an officer, I've been to infantry officer course, why should I have to go to the basic reconnaissance course? Because they knew that they would suffer, and they didn't want to learn what their Marines were doing for their occupation. They didn't know how to employ them, but my point is you had weak leaders, Mike, and unfortunately they took over. They own the club. They're running the club. But these are guys that look lean, look tough, may have, clean shave, sharp haircut, crisp uniforms, polished boots, on record. Those are the garrison mindset. Now, and I'm going to get into some of this here in a bit, and I don't really want to emphasize it now, but I recently went to Camp Pendleton, where I was stationed 12 of the years I was in there, and I love Camp Pendleton. But I saw the complete degradation of discipline, the deficiencies in leadership. I mean, tumbleweeds waist high all across, not out in the field. I'm talking in common areas around that camp beautification. It has a purpose, and that may not be what you want to focus on, but you always have sick, lame, and lazy, short timers, people that have a purpose that they can do. But Mike, that wasn't a one data point. And it's good that you're sitting down, because I'm going to talk about some hallowed ground, because I did, as I spoke to you before, I went down to the Marine Corps Recruit Depot where we make Marines, and I didn't see just the dilapidated properties. I saw windowsills all across the base with wood rot. I saw just paint rotting off, chipped, cracked. It was like, we have the largest defense budget that we've ever had in American history. And once we've gone all this contractor provided restoration and barracks that used to, as I would go down there and you could spend $40 and get a nice room for a night. Now it's 160 some in Camp Pendleton, $183. What I mean is show me a contract and I'll show you a general officer in charge. And now you can't have young Marines enjoying the benefit. You're supposed to have funds set aside from what you spend on it. The exchange is going to create quality of life programs for young Marines. It is so absorbed in this obsession for the little tiny people at the top that, you know what, Mike, they failed. If you were in charge of strategy, if you were in charge of fighting in war zones, we don't fight to fight, we fight to win. There's a big difference in that. And if you couldn't get it done, then you should be spending some time. And if you preach to the Joint Staff, you preach to members of Congress and both House and Armed Services Committees that we need more money, we stay the course. The Afghan National Security Force, we're training them and they're going to hold up, they're going to be independent in fighting the Taliban. Those were lies that we knew. They had assessment teams that they distorted the facts. Sorry for this early sermon before the beginning of the weekend, Mike, but I will tell you, we preach integrity in the Marine Corps, and our senior leaders, there's a few that bring it, and there's a few good men, but the title of my book was wrong. There's more than just a few bad men. It just took over. And men who are frontline foot soldiers deserve the best. They deserve more than just competent commanders. They deserve people who are zealots, who are sold out to fight and to win, and to give them the greatest chance of coming home the way that they deployed.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You're preaching to the choir on this one, Fred, and I can already tell that I'm going to take this snippet out and make a standalone lesson, on the YouTube channel. I also have personally witnessed, as a retiree, going on Camp Pendleton and Camp Lejeune over the last 10 years or so, and being appalled at what I see, not only with the upkeep of the base, but with the appearance of the Marines as well. Now, yes, there are still many Marines that are looking good, but I know retirees who will not go on base, or they will not go in the PX or the snack bar at the PX during the lunch hours, because what they see there is beyond the pale. Unkempt Marines, fat Marines, and somewhere along the line, Fred, it appears that we've adopted the Army's pass-fail. It's good enough. It's within regs. And I think that came from prolonged combat deployments, where rightfully so, people were focused on getting ready and deploying and all that. But I think it became cool, and I've talked to active duty guys, and they don't disagree with me. It became almost cool to be unsat.
Yeah.
And I would say this: you're as good as it gets with combat mentality. You're not a REMF by any degree. And I can guarantee you, your reputation is such that your Marines, when it was time to get nasty and scrubby and can't shave for 4 days and all that, that's what they did. But your force recon platoon in the rear, they looked like good Marines. They were disciplined, because you and your leaders knew that kind of discipline transfers 100% over to combat. Are they getting haircuts anymore? Probably not, because, are their hair going to get long? Are they going to go through shave? Are they going to be dirty? Blah, 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 yes and that. But the discipline of adhering to those standards in peacetime is what makes sure that the right crypto fills are in, that the headlamps on your vehicles are blacked out, that everybody's got the right ammo, that they really are sighted in, they've got the right NVG batteries, blah, blah, blah. You get my point. And I am an observer of this, and you lived it, you saw it. And again, we're just trying to warn the current and younger guys, just because you may see this doesn't mean it's right. Take charge, because I'm going to let you talk again on this. I say an undisciplined, sloppy, lackadaisical, laissez-faire unit in peacetime, the combat genie does not suddenly come when it's time to do it. Hit them with a wand on the head, and now they're bloodthirsty, competent killers. And I say competent. It's one thing to want to go kill the enemy. It's another thing to be competent in your trade so that you can terrorize and kill the enemy and minimize the effects on your own friendly force. So before I start spitting too much, what do you think, Fred?
Yes, I'm going to sound like a hypocrite when I say some of this, because I will agree with everything you said, but the examples seem hypocritical. And I'm going to give a couple examples. I earned this nickname called Filthy Fred, and it's because in combat, when there's a finite amount of time to plan and to execute, and we were on this one deployment in 2005, we were going out multiple times as often as we had indications of warnings of enemy activity. So you'd come off of mission and you'd conduct hasty interrogations. You'd write up the report. You'd go debrief the aviation element that flew you in there, that provided air cover, both attack helicopters and fixed wing attack. There was just so much to do it correctly, that your hygiene, your physical fitness, that is in sustain mode. Those are important things that I believe, but in my commanding officer, I was a captain as a Force Recon platoon commander, and I did that for 6 years as a captain, as a Force, which I had it was a huge blessing to do that. But there was things that I realized at the time, like they made the very first version of these Marine, they call it MARPAT camis. It's a different utility uniform, and it wasn't made with the strength that later generations were. But we were hopping over walls, these outer compound gates and barriers. My commanding officer got after me all the time. He's, Fred, what's the matter with you? You can't set. And I'm like, sir, I'm sewing these up constantly, but it's just the material. But my point is it is important, but the tempo and to outpace your enemy and to have them sense that there is this force that is so violent, so large, and continually after them. It's more important to maintain that tempo than to have the perfectly sewn uniforms or to have a stockpile. I mean, I don't want to fault my former commander, but there is a point in, hey, we could be resourced better. I could have more camis, but I will say, here's the contradiction unto that. I think it was after my third deployment on amphibious ships as a Force Recon platoon commander. We just came back from Iraq, and I was about ready to go out to the close quarter battle range and see one of our brother platoons in their training, because I had just literally, Mike, just gotten off the ship in San Diego, and hey, this is a brotherhood. Force Recon platoon commanders, we call it the Captain's Protection Association. That brotherhood was tight at First Force Recon. This was before the Marine Special Operations, and this was the very elite of the Marine Corps. And so there was a brand new captain who had just checked in. And I said, hey, Captain, I won't mention his name. I said, I'm going to take another new platoon commander who just finished schools, and he's about ready to go to schools. I said, we're going to go out and let's go out to the close quarter battle range and see our brother Jeremy out there. And he said, no, I want to go do some physical fitness, and that's important. But again, lions eat meat. Lions don't have salads with vinaigrette. I mean, the PT is good. You can do that at any time, but he'll be out on that range to see the full manifestation, Mike, of what you will do. To me, there's limited time to do that. And if you say, nonchalant, that nonchalance, I also saw it in one of my peers later in MARSOC, a guy who'd, no offense, Mike, but he came from the basic school and he was infantry and no background in recon. His most important thing he did was get his jump and dive. And his statements to me, and he came back from his first combat deployment in MARSOC, where he had fatalities. He had the first fatality in MARSOC, comes back, and this is a peer. And he says, Fred, I know everything to do. It's just like, I'm not challenged anymore. And I was like, the arrogance. And so why do I say that is there is a time and a place to, be, have your focus be on appearance. We do these things at the ball and celebrate our tradition and heritage.
Yes.
But when you are in battle, I would say that I bet you the Marines in the very first combat action down in Nassau, Bahamas on the 4th of March in 1776, before we even declared our own independence, they probably didn't have the sharpest uniforms and the closest shaves, but they ransacked that British garrison, took their weapons, took their ammunition, got back on ships, and kicked ass all the way up the eastern seaboard. That is the mentality that is the very first to fight in our nation. And that's whether it's 231 years later on that same exact day when we were attacked in eastern Afghanistan and our Marines on the machine guns fired without any hesitation. They were trained just like our call sign, Task Force Violent. That mindset is the exact opposite of, I want to do what's comfortable. It's nice in Camp Pendleton, 72 degrees and a cool breeze. I can go for a beach run. Negative.
Yeah.
Same thing with out on the East Coast when we stood up MARSOC, that I can't learn anything. And at that point, I was like, hey, this is what I've done for 19 years of my life. Actually, at that point, it's 20 years, and I'm feeling like I am learning. I'm like a starving hobo seeing a ham sandwich there on the bench, just hungering and thirsting for anything I can learn from a corporal, a staff sergeant, a captain, and I always would. I'd be impressed with these young officers that would come in and they could make this presentation like, whoa, I didn't learn that in college, Mike. I mean, I was just learning to walk upright, more of a Neanderthal in some of these skills, but to constantly learn, but to have that attitude of, no big deal. That kind of complacency kills Marines.
I agree entirely. And I don't want any viewers to misinterpret me, because I don't think Mike Etor has a reputation of being a REMF. And I can show you some pictures of me in combat environments where I let's just say I wasn't ready for inspection, and neither were my Marines, because that was the focus, is combat and doing it and all that. And there's no showers and stuff like that. What I say is there are standards in the peacetime, and meet the standards. And I would just say this: a sloppy unit in any way, I guarantee you their weapons aren't in shape, their tactics aren't on point, their discipline, and I mean discipline about their ability to effectively be competent and execute in combat. That's all that matters. I've never been aware. I've seen some slack units, and they're not the units that you want your son to serve in. And I've mentioned this before on this podcast. I knew a retired sergeant major who became a contractor, and he was in Iraq as a contractor, and his job was to prep the incoming Marine battalions, Marine infantry battalions. And he said, Mike, over the 3 or 4 years I was doing that, I saw a couple dozen battalions. And in every case, when a battalion came in late for appointments, they looked like shit. There was no sense of urgency. They performed mediocre at best in combat, and I am convinced most of them had casualties that were avoidable, and those casualties resulted from a lack of tactical excellence and a lack of discipline. And he said, coming in looking good and looking prepared wasn't a guarantee, but the best predictor, as you know, Fred, of future performance is past performance. And you show me commanders, officers and staff NCOs that can't ensure their Marines are physically and mentally tough, it's not going to go well in combat. So I am, like you, all about combat. And anything, and I think we don't do a good enough job, many people don't do enough job about why do we have to have a uniform? Why do we have to do this? Well, first of all, it'll resonate with you, Fred. Most of the Marine Corps are not special operators. Those guys haven't been vetted. The special ops guys across the board do have a higher intellect, a higher sense of purpose, a higher sense of bias for action. And you can count on those guys with minimal supervision. The conventional forces are largely made up of young guys 2 years out of high school or less. And they do have to be gripped to get them prepared to save their lives and the lives of their mates in combat. And so that's my thought right there is show me a slack unit and I'll show you slack leaders. And those guys are never tactical wizards, ever, ever, ever in my experience. They are weak and they have prospered via the garrison route, and they can't get out of that mentality that you saw in combat. Let me just get through this combat deployment, and I don't care if we get in combat. Let me just get through it, and I'm a shoo-in for colonel or major or first sergeant or whatever the case may be. So listen, Fred, our time is running out here. We're going to split this podcast up to a few parts and all of that. A wealth of knowledge so far. I would ask you humbly to come back and do part 2. And we'll continue on the topic is, combat leadership, because you said so much in your comments, and I know you got more. And so, my friend, I thank you for your time. I can already tell this is going to be a highly regarded, well-traveled episode. And so you have mentioned your book a couple times, and I want to, before we conclude part 1, tell folks about your book, what the title is, what it's about, and where they can find it.
Yes, Mike. It was important to write a book because there's so many people who have written books, and that's great. Some of this can help people, but there are times when things don't go right. And as leaders, you have to anticipate and forecast and see the unseen of something that is not supposed to happen. And that's what this book is. It's not a norm. It's an extraordinary circumstance where we expect the enemy to fight us directly. We expect the enemy to use indirect information warfare, reinforced with riots, the head of their state, the president condemning us. We don't expect our American leaders, and I wouldn't say they were duped. We have very smart people in charge wearing 3- and 4-star collars, but we didn't expect them to publicly condemn us, to eat their own, to unleash 45 criminal investigators in this attempt to destroy what a Secretary of Defense at the time had created is, hey, Marine Corps, get on board. I want all these services to expand special operations because that was his bid for success. But the reason I mention that is you're going to hit a crucible moment where that is bigger than you, and you have to depend on something bigger than you. And for me, that was God, and that required myself to step back, get to higher ground, and understand that now I have to, just like they trained me as a tactical leader, I have to gain and maintain fire superiority. And by doing that, I'm not talking about with crew served weapons. I'm talking about with media. I'm talking about with lawmakers, bipartisan, bicameral. I'm talking about getting into courtrooms and fighting and winning with this campaign strategy that took 12 years. It wasn't simple, but to have victory and to have people that would have had a very destructive life have this life that is just completely indescribable. It's beyond their imaginations to see what's happened to our men, and it's just a huge blessing. So the book, A Few Bad Men, it is available on Amazon. It's usually sold out in most bookstores. It was a #1 best-selling, award-winning book. And it's available on Audible. You can even buy an audio disc now, so you can listen to it if you're busy, or you can read it on Kindle electronically, get it immediately downloaded, or order it and get it. And there's more information about the book at commandoshow.com, and they can reach me at either Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Fred Galvin. Mike.
Yeah. So, well, for those that are listening or watching this, I was privileged. Fred gave me an advance copy, so I read it before it was a book. It's excellent, and I've got the book, and I've read it again in book format. It's an excellent, a really unfortunate event, but all military folks, particularly those in leadership roles, need to read this because it's astounding and embarrassing that the Marine Corps did this to some of its warriors. And if people don't learn their lessons from this, it'll be repeated. And as you know, Fred, it has been repeated in several of the other services since the debacle that was forced upon you and your great Marines and all that. So, my friend, thank you so much. We are rounds complete for part 1 of the Fred Galvin episodes, and I'm really looking forward to speaking to you again. We'll get these episodes packaged up, and I suspect they're going to be highly trafficked, as I say. So, thank you so much, Fred. And leaders, we are. Well, you're very welcome. I appreciate your time. And leaders, stand by for part 2 of the Fred Galvin episodes, and have a great day. And as always, leaders, go forth and lead well.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please subscribe, rate, review, and recommend to your friends. Please visit our website at combatleadership.com. Until next time, remember the words of the ancient philosopher Plato. Only the dead have seen the end of war.